Hello, this is Clive Priddle, and I'm here with a new episode of The Current. And joining me today are two terrific writers for young adults, Jewell Rhodes and Kelly McWilliams. Hello to you both. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So it's especially great that you're able to join us this week because it is, for much of America, back to school week. So it's nice that we're managing to transition the focus to younger readers. And I think you're joining us from Seattle on the West Coast, Colorado in the Midwest, Mountain
Yeah,
State,
for me.
and we're on the East Coast here. So we're covering the country here. And I'm especially pleased to be able to talk to you both because you are both challenging, innovative writers. You're very bold on some of the topics that you've covered, especially for young adults. And I wanted to ask you first, before we talk a little bit about some of your books, what impression are you getting in this very strange year when kids are having a lot of their usual rhythms very badly disrupted? I mean, the back to school is barely a back to school. What are you hearing about what they're reading? How are they responding to your work? How are you reaching out to them? How are you communicating with them? How are you hearing from them? So can I ask you perhaps both to talk a little bit about that? Jewell, do you want to start off?
Sure, I'll be happy to start. I've actually been getting for the last 6 weeks just tons of emails from students who want to read my book or have read my book or are writing an essay for their school newspaper, and a lot of teachers saying, can you help me figure out how to get books to my kid? And actually, I was thinking just this morning, in fact, I've just gifted a lot of books to a lot of teachers, but they are so stressed, because they want books in kids' hands and it's nearly impossible, and that they feel that the e-experience isn't as rich. Hachette, of course, has extended its reading period or reading aloud to students, but I feel as though there's a desperation on the level of how do I do this in terms of curriculum, but also how do I do this in terms of making a space for social justice, since the children are inundated with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, the paralyzation of Jacob Blake, that they know what's going on in terms of society, beyond the pandemic in terms of social justice, and there's this need to talk. I'm also getting a lot of email from kids saying, I am this boy, Jerome, in your character. I am feeling marked. I am feeling alienated. And so they just want me to respond and talk back to them. And actually, I had one little boy from Denver who tracked me down on Instagram and literally called me. And that had never happened before. So I think that desire to connect for both students and teachers is very great.
Absolutely. And no, that's so wonderful that he was able to call you. What a clever kid, because that information is not easy to find. But,
I know.
No, I mean, I've seen just so much stress from young adults, and I have worried throughout the summer about how young people are going to get access to books. Jewell writes for sort of the middle grade reader who often, they are given books by teachers. Librarians play a huge role. And of course, that's true with young adult literature too. But when it comes to teenagers, they're not always reading things that are parent sanctioned. They might, a teenager might pick up my book just because it speaks to them, but maybe it's not something that, say, a very religious parent would necessarily want them to have. The book deals with religion in sort of complex ways, and, not everyone's okay with that. So I worry about access as we're still looking at libraries doing their best, but not being open for everyone all the time, not being easily open. Bookstores, I still haven't seen my book in an actual bookstore, and I won't, I think, until about November 28th. And so one of the things that I did, one of my little initiatives, was I was trying to reach out to the little free libraries, those little neighborhood box libraries, to see if I could get Agnes into as many of those as possible, because at least those young adults can have that browsing experience, that choice experience. And it's not just, here's my reading list, here's what I'm supposed to read. We've seen a lot of those lists for sort of anti-racism, and they're wonderful. But for teenagers in particular, like choice is key.
That's the one thing we've all got a little bit better at this year. We're doing it now. Is talking via the technology. Have you been able to have good interactions with groups of your readers through Zoom calls and things like that?
Me again. Okay. Yes. And in fact, they make me so happy. I miss being in the classroom myself and miss the students. And it's also, I love how I can see the individuality of kids' rooms, the posters that they have on the wall, whether they're sitting in a chair or slinging back in their beds, and it's really wonderful. And I too sometimes you'll see their parents as shadows in the background. But I've had Girl Scout troops. I've had, summer camps, an author book camp. I've had, sort of classroom sessions for summer school, and they've been wonderful. And also I've gotten up really early in the morning because I've been Zooming with Switzerland and Germany and Africa, and that's amazing. So I'm loving it. I like to travel, but I'm loving having that connection still.
Yeah, I think it's been an amazing gift that we have the technology that we do, and that we're all reaching a new level of fluency with it too. Because I remember at the beginning of the summer when we started our virtual author tour, we were like, is this even going to work? Are we even going to be able to log on? We had some deep conversations about Instagram and how that works. And one of my most memorable moments from this summer, though, was connecting with an organization called the Society for Young Inklings. And so those are children who they're readers, but they also want to become writers. It's a nonprofit organization. They're related to Stone Soup and Hamlin University. And they're doing a wonderful job of hosting drafting workshops for teenagers. So I was able to hear from teenagers who read, among other things, actually Doormat, the book that I wrote when I was myself a teenager. And we talked about sort of that and what that was like. And we talked about Agnes, and they asked me their questions, which they always surprise me by how astute they are and how thoughtful they are. So I think although we're in this crazy moment of crisis, I have some hope that we're going to see a great explosion of art, just wonderful, vibrant art when these kids grow up. Because, who's been through an experience like this? It's got to shape our culture in fantastic ways.
Yeah, I had the good fortune once to work in a small way with Geraldine Brooks when she was writing her historical novel Year of Wonders, which is about a plague year in a village that has to isolate against the plague. And it's a terrific book if you haven't come across it. No thanks to me, but it's a terrific book. And I have become increasingly obsessed that 2020 seems to be, in a very dark way, a year of wonders. That we're seeing things on a scale and with a regularity that we've never really experienced before or prepared for. At least I haven't, but you in some ways have. I'm astonished, Jewell, that the topics that you have taken on in your young adult fiction have included a young boy who dies at the hands of the police. You've dealt with the trauma of 9/11 and the residual nature of that trauma. And I think your most recent book, you're talking about whether a boy identifies black or white. And the tensions between those two identifications. How you almost seem the best prepared of all of us to cope with a year like this. And I should say just before getting to you that Kelly's book is amazing too, because not only does it have a pandemic, fully realized pandemic, but it also has a very interesting sort of farmer subplot as well. Which, again, I feel that all of us, we're so much more obsessing about pharmacology these days and vaccines and everything else. So how is it that you have, both of you, have in some ways anticipated this extraordinary year that we're living through? How does your imagination take you there? Who wants to take that one first?
Well, I didn't plan on having my novels speak so much to the moment. Actually, all my writing is driven by what interests me, and what has interested me the most is the African American narratives, the stories that are not told, uncovering issues. I also know that when I was a child, I didn't have books. I felt very lonely, felt very isolated. And when I read my first book by a Black novelist in college, it made me feel a presence that I didn't have before. So I've always been uncovering, which maybe on one way, I'm suggesting that race has and always will still be with us as an issue. That yes, I'm still writing about it because it still speaks to my culture, my experience raising children in this world. And that's a tragedy. But one of the things that, in terms of uncovering the narratives and controlling the storyline, I also put in the affirmation that I get to speak to the resilience of Black people. I get to speak to that sense of, hey, I'm still here and look what we've contributed to culture, to society. So even though I write about really tough topics, I think in some sense I'm motivated that I got through a lot of tough times, and I just want to help other kids get through them too. And I do know, as one of my characters says in Ninth Ward with Hurricane Katrina, she says, always, eventually, the universe shines down with love. And I believe that. So I'm there to take a problem and let children know you will survive this. You will get through. And why don't you tell me about your history, your heritage, your story too?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there's very much a way in which Black Americans were maybe more prepared for this year, because we sort of have been living with these traumas constantly for such a long time, and even these historical traumas that we just walk around with and we carry. And I think you can see some of that preparation and some of that inner strength and toughness that's just born of being from a marginalized group in the way that we responded to George Floyd in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, it was like people were right there and they were ready, and they were ready to figure out how to protest safely and smartly. And I mean, it hasn't stopped. It hasn't, it's not over. So I think, for us, it's like, every year sort of feels a little bit wild. I still remember, Rodney King during my childhood. Now when we write about that time period, we call it historical fiction, but it lives inside all of us. And, just, the Bush administration years, Hurricane Katrina, that was extremely formative. I just think that there's ways in which we responded differently and had more preparation with trauma. But I will say there is something very crazy, especially now looking at the forest fires, where it just feels like one thing after another, like the ground is shifting beneath our feet. In Colorado, we had the mountains were blocked out with smoke for at least 4 days. And it was, sort of this darkness. And it reminded me and my husband, who had lived in Honolulu, of of the bomb, when the volcano would explode, the sky would be that dark. So yeah, it's a crazy time. And I just hope that kids sort of get through it okay. Yeah.
Well, I think,
let me say something crazier. The novel I just finished, it's about California wildfires. How did I do that? It's called Paradise on Fire. It was responding to Paradise. And then here we are right in the midst of wildfires. So maybe I'm attuned to present day and how to get over, how to keep whole within that. But I do want to also say that I carry a lot of trauma, and I have had crying jags. I've had just concerns when I'm outside that people weren't wearing masks. I think, you're trying to kill me. I'm sort of like an elder American. And then hearing and witnessing all the video of more violence against Black peoples, it does remind me of when I was a little girl and saw the images of Emmett Till. So I must give credit where credit's due. And that's that younger generation, that they keep me going and maybe make it so that I keep doing my stories, reminding them that they can be of help.
I've been researching the history of Jim Crow for my next book, and I just happened to come across a story in there. It's a compilation of oral histories that I'm working from called "Remembering Jim Crow" by Ann Volk, and there's another artist person as well. They come out of the University of North Carolina. But one of the interviews, this elder Black man was talking about how Alexander Dumas was Black. He was a Black count, and he was a fencing master, but no one ever told him that in school. And that absence isn't accidental. It was an erasure to try and attack sort of the self-esteem of these children who need to grow up to become something, to become fighters, really. That's what they needed from that time. And so those repressions, I tend not to see them as super accidental. And I love that we're hearing that explosion of voices, just as you said. I think it can only bring good things. It can only help make this world a better place.
Do you sense that that everybody's embracing the social justice mission right now amongst your audiences and amongst that young readership? Are you coming across any of the sort of resistance that comes from maybe the white group feeling marginalized themselves now, or feeling that they don't know how to join this conversation without being out of place?
Oh my goodness! I mean, certainly, YA Twitter is famous for being an inflammatory space that terrifies me to my bones. So I can't even believe I'm talking about it in public. But certainly, I mean, we've had authors feel, that they are not free to write what they can imagine, that they feel like they're being limited to, write what that they're not allowed to reach out into these other cultures and other places.
I think that we have to beware of putting limits on imagination. And I've written about a Vietnamese, I've written about Chinese, that I feel as though when we start getting into who can do what, there is also the danger that we are engaging in another kind of discrimination. And we're saying that we really are apples and oranges. Well, I guess are apples and broccoli, when in fact we're just all human. I also don't see it as my mission to write social justice novels. I write what I'm interested in, but who I am as a person, that comes bubbling through my stories. But now I'm writing about climate change, and that comes bubbling through. So I would worry if I was expected to do Ghost Boys and Black Brother over and over and over again. But I will say, in terms of pushback, there have been 2 times in my life where I have been hurt by racism from both sides of the aisle, Black and white. One, when I wrote about the Tulsa Race Massacre, and a reviewer said that there was no way that a young Black man could have ever identified with the Jewish performer Houdini. That literally, that's an impossibility. And the book, which had been doing very, very well, sort of stopped in its tracks. And it was like, what? What does that mean? And I was really offended by that. In Ghost Boys, I have an Hispanic character, Carlos, who makes friends with the African-American boy who's murdered by the police. And there's also then Sarah, the policeman's daughter, and Sarah is white, who can see the 2 ghosts, the dead Emmett Till, the dead Jerome, and she's another kind of bridge to reality like Carlos is. I got a lot of pushback for why was Sarah white, and that somehow by introducing a white character into this story that I was giving in to a white audience, or I wasn't then confronting enough the whole dynamic between sexuality and how a Black man was accused of assaulting white women. And I'm thinking, one, this is a middle grade novel, but most importantly, why wouldn't there be Carlos? Why wouldn't a white child have a heart warm and good enough to understand that this is a racial horror and I have a responsibility to help fix it? So sometimes strange things happen, and I'm very much more writing according to my own inner heart, and what the world will do with it, that's what they do with it. I am not writing for a cause, but I do think that a cause gets fed and nourished through my literature, and my cause is that humanity, when we get rid of colorism, when we get rid of the idea that superficial appearances dictate how we should be treated, then we will become, the civilization that we were meant to become.
I feel like there is a lot of truth in that. For me, there are some things in Agnes at the End of the World that are really far afield from my own identity that I did not seek a sensitivity reader for. For example, I've never been in a cult. Agnes starts out in a cult that she escapes from. It's based on a cult that we sort of lived not that far away from when we were growing up in Arizona. I certainly did my research, but I didn't feel like I needed to sort of put that through the sensitivity reader. I wasn't concerned about any mistakes because I had really truly followed like a real curiosity about people of faith and what makes people gravitate towards spirituality and faith. And strangely enough, that is the part of the book that people tell me resonates with them the most. I've had many pastors' children and also double pastors' children, we've got mom and dad preaching, talk to me about that representation, and they assume actually that I must have been in a very intense fundamentalist religion. And so I think that you were wise to say what you did. That I think we all know when we're telling the truth, when we're really truly trying to connect with something outside of ourselves. And for me, what I follow is my curiosity. If my curiosity is real, I can imagine myself in many different places. The type 1 diabetes had me worried because I found that more difficult to imagine than I had expected. So in that instance, just based on my gut, I went out and got that checked.
I want to thank you both for all the voices that you brought into our conversation today on the current. I think it's a great thing to have in a going back to school period, to have a lot of voices. I think that's what we've been missing through much of the summer, is not having as many voices in our lives as we'd like. You two are so wonderful. Thank you for the work you do. Thank you for joining us today. I really wish you both, every success and continuing success with what you're doing.
Oh, same to you. Thank you so much for having us.
Hachette,